Welcome, everybody, to the Baseball Blueprint Podcast, your home for all things player development, where we highlight some of the best instructors in the game. Today, we have Wright State Associate Head Coach and Recruiting Coordinator, Jordan Cairo. Jordan, it's great to have you on the show, man.
I appreciate you having me, man. I've listened to a few episodes. It's great stuff. Excited to be on.
Yeah, man, this is gonna be a blast. So you're one of the first hitting guys we've had on. Now Denneman does a really good job with hitting, but that was more towards culture and kind of like an operations system. We want to dive into the details behind the player development, recruiting on the hitting side. So leading into this, are there some things that you see when you're looking at just the recruiting classes you're working with now, and you're saying, you know what, those are some traits that are really hard to teach. Those are some traits that are pretty rare. These are what we're hunting in the recruiting space.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think you just hit on it perfectly. Is I kind of view when you're evaluating hitters, I view it from a development lens. So the things that are going to happen naturally when you're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-olds is um, the power and the strength is going to happen. Like every one of our guys is on an individual hitting program, an individual bat speed program. We have a huge lifting culture. So the power is going to come. Now, does it matter? Do you look at it? Of course. Like the raw tools absolutely matter. But the things that I think are the big separators, and before I say this, it's an inexact science, man, because you have high school guys that maybe face the arms they're going to face in college once or twice a year. So you're not really getting a chance to evaluate them against what they're going to have to compete against at the next level. But the things that are the hardest to teach, like you said, is swing and miss and the ability to see spin. So those for us at least, those are the two biggest things when you look at when you've checked off the initial tools box. Like, is he athletic enough to play for you? Does he have the prerequisite bat speed to getting his foot in the door? But then, if you're able to see spin and you're able to make consistent contact, that's more important to me than it is maybe the raw exit velo coming off the bat. Because if you get into college and you do the right things and you're in the right program, those things will happen naturally. But from a pure hitting standpoint, the guys that can find the barrel consistently, those are guys that are going to continue to play this game for a long time.
I dig it. And from a development standpoint, when you get these incoming freshmen or portal guys coming into the program, are those two areas that you start to see early? Like, hey, the guys who have been in our program have a decent gap between those and areas that you really attack for improvement?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you recruit it. So in the recruiting process, you try to identify it as best as you can. But especially for freshmen, like that's such a huge jump. Like, and from everyone talks about the stuff difference that you face at any collegiate level from high school. It's a big jump. But the real difference we're seeing now is like most of the guys we face are 50-50 splits from fastball to breaking ball, which wasn't the case, 10 years ago, not even
Yep.
close. So the approach side of things is probably the biggest jump most of these guys have to face. Now, portal guys are a little different. We don't do a ton in the portal, so most of our guys are high school and developed. But when we get these freshmen in, that's the biggest jump is understanding like it's 2-0. You're not going to get a cookie all the time. Like you're probably going to get a slider. So, and if you have an issue hitting that to begin with, and now the approach completely changes. That's what makes it incredibly difficult. But from like a bat speed standpoint, like we'll have our guys hit breaking balls all the time. Like we train to sit secondary at times, and we need our guys to see it constantly because that's just the way the game's going, man. Like everyone's throwing harder, and everyone tries to land breaking balls consistently. So that 50-50 split, man, it makes it really tough on our hitters. So yeah, if you see a big gap between the juniors and the seniors that have been in a training environment and understand it versus the freshmen coming in. Not only are they having to learn how to hit 92, 93 on a regular basis, now they have to learn to adjust to secondary and hitters count. So it's tough, but when you put them in the environment where they have to get used to it, the learning curve is typically a little bit faster.
I dig it, and it's so funny that that adjustment happens for the hitters as well, but that also impacts your strategy, right? That leads itself to maybe a little bit more mobile of an offense, which again historically, Wright State's been incredible at applying pressure and just creating chaos on the bases. So Could you give us a little bit of that backstory of what kind of led you guys and down the paths that you've chosen in terms of operations? Who are some mentors that maybe have led you along that kind of hitting path for you?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, that's a great question, man. But our offense, like when you look at it, like, and we're completely honest in the recruiting process, like the guy that's 6'3", smooth, and has a ton of pop, and he's hit on the national level, like we're not getting that guy out of high school. Like that guy's going to the SEC or the ACC, and it just is what it is. So our only way to compete on a national level, which we've been able to do for a long time, is we can't play the same game as those guys. So what we have to do is we have to get the guy that's as athletic as some of those guys, and we have to be able to develop them at a high level, and we have to be able to create chaos. We have to be able to lay bugs down for a hit. We have to apply constant pressure on the bases. So we won't play many games where we won't match up against anybody from a straight athleticism, speed, and physicality standpoint. And I view that as our job when we recruit these guys. Like it's our job to teach them how to hit, and hopefully, when they're sophomores, juniors, seniors, maybe sometimes even freshmen, we're able to stand toe to toe with those guys. But I kind of, when you talk about the mentor thing, I've been lucky to be around a ton of really great baseball minds, man. And kind of the first one that comes to mind is when I coached at Wright State the first time, Jeff Mercer. He's now the head coach at Indiana University. He was the hitting coach at Wright State the first time I was there. And he was kind of the first guy that taught hitting differently than what me and you were probably taught growing up. You know, what the games, how it's been taught, you know, our whole lives, like the simplest stuff. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but he kind of opened my eyes into a whole different style of learning how to use the body, talking about the kinetic chain, all that stuff that now is more mainstream. Back 10 years ago when he was talking about it, not many people were doing it. So he's actually the guy that got me down this hitting rabbit hole and made me realize there's so much more than what I was taught. And then you have guys like, I would say Mike Deegan's a huge one for me. I know you had Mike on not too long ago. I mean, he's an absolute superstar, and not so much, I would say, from like the X's and O's from the hitting side, but he was so instrumental in teaching me how to relay that information that you know, how to know how to create relationships with your players, so it's more than just X's and O's, and building systems was a huge thing I learned from him. Like the one thing I would say to younger coaches is not, if you don't have a system, it's really hard to have positive progression. Meaning, if you're just jumping in the cage every day and you're just kind of fixing, in air quotes, fixing what you see that day, that's not really sustainable, and you can't really build off that. So he's the one who kind of made me think about how I was doing things and kind of try to create a system. Not that it's perfect, but it's like being in the weight room where if you have a system, you have a program, the players know what you value when it comes to the mechanical side of things or the approach side of things. Then everybody's able to grow. Everybody's on the same page. So Coach Deegan was huge for me. I mean, when probably, I think it was a while back now, but for like 4 years, I would drive 45 minutes for almost nothing just to be around that dude. You know what I mean? I trained their hitters for 3 or 4 years, and he was awesome in getting me and helping me grow from more than just the X's and O's. And then I would say the last, I guess, mentors, you're going to see it now. I know you're at the Dome, but when the pro guys come back here and they start training in December and January, and I was quote unquote coaching them, but just picking their brains. Like when they're competing at the highest level, and you got guys that have been in the big leagues like Eric Stamens, Evan White, or like last year we had guys that went straight from high school to pro ball, like Colt Emerson, AJ Ewing, and it's just it's fun to and incredibly educational to hear them talk, because you get inside their brains, and guys that have to take that huge jump. We're talking about guys going from high school to college. These guys are going from high school to pro ball, and just understanding what they had to go through and just be able to pick their brain. So a mix of all those things, man. But I'm sure I'm forgetting some people, but I've been lucky enough to be around a lot of great minds.
That's so cool, and I think it's an incredible journey you've had bouncing from place to place, and then again being at Wright State previously, and now back there as the associate head coach. You also spent some time as the PBR director for Ohio, which is
Mhm.
awesome. How is that world kind of contrasted and played well with where you're at now, recruiting for a school instead of recruiting for a essentially a large organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's not incredibly different. Now, from just the surface level, like I always tell people, because I get that question all the time, and it is like with PBR, I was evaluating the whole state. So, but it's still evaluating players. And then at the Dome, I was working with 100 kids. And so it's still developing athletes, but now it's just shrunk a little bit, right? So now you're in each class, you're trying to bring in, 6 to 10 guys, and then we have 18 hitters on our roster this year. And I would say the big difference is what we hit on earlier, like style of play. And I would say that's probably um, a lot of college coaches would say the same thing. Like there's a lot of players that I would rank or evaluate higher on a board when you're just talking like from a prospect standpoint, that guys that were ranked quote unquote lower that I would recruit first at Wright State, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like maybe a guy's more polished with the bat, and player A is more polished. He's proven more, I guess you could say, at the high school level. And then player B has a higher athletic ceiling and fits kind of our style of play. Like, if that makes sense, if you get where I'm going with
Yeah.
that, like we might recruit player B, but if I was at PBR, maybe player A's stock would be considered a little bit higher at that time.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. I think a lot of the times in the recruiting process, players start to get caught up in comparisons, and we've talked about this on the show before. But it can be so damaging trying to compare yourself to other players. You don't know what a certain school's looking for, and whatever is going to happen is going to happen. You can only control so much of this process, right? So
Mhm.
for those players listening, you're listening to a guy who has spent time in this chaotic bubble of trying to evaluate players constantly, their continuing development, trying to make sure they're accurately represented. And now he's in a space where he's trying to acquire these players as well to help his program. And you're hearing it from him himself. Like these rankings are rankings based on prospects, not necessarily the best fit for a given school, right? So being able to understand that's important, and also like if you got a dream school, maybe identifying the way they recruit and the values that they want to hunt and use offensively or defensively, and developing those tools. That's a great way to go about personal development and adding stuff to your
Mhm.
toolbox. And so
100%.
with that in mind too, if you're a player and you're interested in getting involved with Wright State, if they've got camps coming up, you'll be able to access that through the Baseball Bluebook app. It's free. You'll be able to check that out. Coach Chiero here will have an account. You'll be able to go through that, find his social media information, be able to contact them through email, and then you'll also be able to DM and have comments there as well. So make sure you guys, if you're looking into the Wright State, check out stuff through the Baseball Bluebook app. And Jordan, for the ways you guys go about recruiting, again, you spent a ton of time at PBR. Are there other outlets that you guys go through, or are you really hunting that space because you know it so well?
I think it's twofold. My answer to that would be is I'm on PBR every day, and it's a great identifying tool. Meaning, like even when I was the one doing the rankings, like these college coaches, like th- if your name's on the list, that's what matters. Like they're going and they're making their own decision, right? So and Kyle Weldon, the guy at PBR now that took my job, he's an awesome dude. He's phenomenal. And if you put 100 coaches in a room, like and they did the rankings, there'll be 100 different rankings. So I look through them all the time for sure. But I think the relationships I created inside of PBR um, with the summer coaches in the state of Ohio and surrounding states, we lean on that a lot. But like I use Kyle. I mean, Kyle Weldon's probably tired of me calling him, man. So I call him all the time. So we use PBR all the time. We'll jump on Perfect Game. But mostly it's a relationship built business. And that's why I think um, if when you're inside from a player standpoint, like if that's why making sure that you're putting your best foot forward when you're working with your summer programs or with your high school programs is so important. Is you can get caught up in looking like ahead, and that's really easy. But I think one of the huge things that I'm a believer in, and I tell all high school guys, is you really need to be where your feet are because um, a college coach isn't going to make a decision on you, or at least he shouldn't make a decision on you without talking to the guys that are coaching you. So my biggest advice always is just dominate the level you're at, dominate for your high school, dominate for your summer team, make sure you're grinding and putting your best foot forward with those guys. Because if I like you at a showcase, like the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call your summer coach, I'm going to call your high school coach. So like just kind of summarize, it's easy to jump ahead to what school you want to go to, your dream school. I got to get recruited and all this. But if you're not dominating the level you're playing at right now, one, you're going to miss out on playing for your high school is one of the coolest things you can do, like being able to represent your community. And then you're going to play summer ball, like you get to make those friends for life and get to play with those dudes. Like that's going to be a really cool time in your life. So if you're so worried about the next step, you're going to miss out on that. And then you don't want to put a bad taste in your mouth for any of the coaches that are going to be coaching you. So, sorry, I kind of went on a little bit of a
No,
rant there. I
that's
hope that
great.
answers your
No,
question.
that was so good. I know for the guys listening, that's going to be super helpful. And kind of steering off here now when it comes to individual instruction, because that's what you did a lot while you were also running PBR. You were giving lessons, working with professionals, higher level college guys through that space. And again, that's something that I'm familiar with too. Through that space, did your teaching style change? Did you pick up different cues that you felt were more helpful? How did that process go for you?
Yeah, I think it was so beneficial to what I'm doing now. I think you have to have core beliefs, right? Um, and but you have to understand, like you have to be willing to change. You have to be open to information. And if I talk to a hitting guy and he goes, "I'm this type of hitting coach," then I immediately kind of get turned off because you can't speak the same language to all these guys. And I think that's, I mean, there were nights where like I would in the mornings I'd be training a guy that's in double A and then at night I'm training an 11-year-old. So like you can't speak the same language as both those guys, but it was incredibly beneficial because if you've put your time in, which most coaches have, like you can, most people can look at and identify what's going on, and you might have your own style and how you typically fix things, but the tough part of this is speaking the player's language and being able to help them make a change. So to answer your question, yeah, I've had stylistic changes over the years just from growing. But I've really tried to immerse myself in everything. Like, for example, like a teacher man. Like, do I believe everything that teacher man says? No. But what happens if I go recruit a guy that hits with teacher man? Like, I have to be able to speak that language. Or like, you guys got the guys at 108 Performance who are kind of the complete opposite. Like, and you have all these different people you can learn from. And I just try to learn and immerse myself in all that because you can pick and choose things and cues and times that will work for some guys, but aren't going to work for other guys. So I always say to coaches, you want to try to be, and I'm not calling myself a doctor by any means, but you want to try to be a doctor versus a dentist. Like if you only have one thing, and nothing against dentists either, but if you go to a dentist and you need your tooth pulled, great. But if you go to him with a rolled ankle and he tries to pull your teeth, like it ain't going to do anything for you, right?
That's
So,
so good.
uh, yeah. So I would say like you have to be able to grow, and I've changed a ton. But I think the biggest thing is being able to communicate what you're seeing to each individual player because you're gonna like we have 18 different hitters on our roster, and we probably have 18 different styles of how guys learn. So you just have to be able to communicate because if you can't communicate and get them to make the change, then the information is useless.
That's so good. And it's funny that you hit on Deegan earlier and talking about relationships and building systems and that process too. And that ties in so well with understanding how to communicate with these guys, right? And I think that's a
Hmm.
process that a lot of coaches who step into a new role for the first time struggle with because that relationship isn't quite there yet, right? And trying to build that, whether it's through
100%.
instructing. And I think one of the benefits of being in a space where you can instruct and you have those the variety of, okay, here's my higher level guy, here's my lower level guy, here's a kid who doesn't speak English, here, let me
Yeah.
work Spanish for an hour, right? So it's one of
Yeah.
those things where being able to adjust is so helpful, but you do start to feel that out, right? And so as you start to work with guys longer, you, at least in my experience, and I'm sure you felt this too, but a jump happens when they start to trust you more, right? That,
Hmm.
that trust is so important. And I think with the guys that you've worked with, and you can see it from the amount of pro guys that you've had your hands on and been able to help with their careers. But I know just from playing against the teams that you coached, it was so difficult, man. I mean, you had some killers who really understood not just where their holes were in their swing, but they knew how to defend that, and they knew how to attack the weaknesses of the pitchers. So from someone who's played against you, like, well done. But
I,
it's one
I
of those
appreciate you,
things
brother.
too where, like, it's so fun to watch you in action too, because it is a way you deliver, right? It's a way you deliver information, and I think for you, is that something that you've had to, again, you talk about stylistic differences, but when you first started out, were you able to feed that information clear and concise, or was that something you had to kind of get your feet wet and work on?
No, I couldn't when I first started out. Yeah, yeah, it's
Amen.
definitely a learned skill, and I think first of all, I appreciate everything you just said. It means a lot coming from a guy like yourself. But I think it's just understanding the human being you're in the cage with. Like some guys, like they want you to they want you to take the reins, and some guys have kind of are hardwired in the way they think, in the way they want to move, and especially like when you're talking anything past high school, like you're talking about guys' careers. So like when they come in, like you better be pretty sure what you're telling them is right. And I think what's helped a lot is the data that we have now.
Yeah.
Like here's what I try to do, and I don't think this is the perfect way, or I'm saying it's what everyone should do. Is I think staying away from your opinion as much as possible in
I
hitting
like that.
is huge because everybody there's a reason there's not one way to teach it. Like every it's such a hard thing to do. We're almost defying physics when we're trying to hit a baseball, uh, especially when you go up at the higher levels, that everybody's so unique, right? So when the system we have at Wright State and the system I kind of grew into over the past decade is you stay away from your opinion as much as possible, and then when it is your opinion, I make sure that I voice that to them, being like, hey, like there's nothing that's backing this up right now, but I this is my opinion. I think you should try this. Like,
Yeah.
but there's I think Kyle Bodie's quote was awesome. I hope I'm saying his last name right, the guy from Driveline. But
Yeah.
when I first started digging in, he was like, how do you know anything you're saying is true? Like, and that kind of just blew my mind because I'd never even thought about that. Like, how do I know? So when I'm delivering information, I try to stick to what we know, which is we know data from the pitch that we're going to face. Like we have TrackMan, we have every pitch thrown last year, so we know what that's going to look like. So we train in that environment. We know anatomy, right? So like each muscle has a job, and if you want to be as efficient as possible when you're moving, if you're using the wrong muscles, it's like running on your hands and complaining that you're slow.
Yeah.
So I try to stick to that directional based. Anything that we just is either science, math, or anatomy based, and you deliver that first. Use data, use film, and then once hitters know that you're sticking to that stuff, and they start to feel some changes, and your opinion's not in it, then they're much more open to when it is your opinion
Right.
to trusting you versus if you just come in hot and you're talking about, hey, like let's add a leg kick or hey, try this, do that. Like then you're messing with their career and you haven't built any trust. So I think trying to identify what you know for a fact to be true, basing a system around that, and then build that trust, and then you can add in your opinion when you think it matters.
Wow, dude. So good, so good. I love that too. We talked about that with Ryan Brownlee a couple episodes back about the evolution of the game and how we're starting to see so many more evidence based approaches and in all facets of the game. And I think that's a valuable thing. That's a great thing. There's some accountability on the coaching side. The players have an understanding of where the information is coming from. So, wow, so good, so good. Let's dive into the last one here. Last thing I got.
Mhm.
Jordan, if you could talk to yourself right when you're starting out, could you give yourself three pieces of advice to help kind of drive your career forward?
Wow, that's a three. I would say the first thing I would do is like if you want to be involved in this game from like a coaching perspective is try to be very clear on where what your dream is. And you might not know that right away. Like my career took a completely different path than I thought it was going to. Um, but I think the biggest thing first is identify what you want to do eventually. And at that point in time, and surround yourself with people that do it at a high level. So when I first went to Wright State in 2015, I was by far not even close the dumbest person in that room. You had Lovelady, who I have so much respect for. He's at Purdue now. He was the head coach. He was the head coach at UCF. You had Jeff Mercer was the hitting guy, recruiting coordinator. He's now the head coach at Indiana. And you had Justin Parker, who is now the pitching coach at Mississippi State. And I'm like 2 years into coaching. So they thought I was quiet for like the first 5 months, but I just didn't have anything to say because I mean, they were so much smarter than me, but it was so beneficial for me because I learned so much. And that's the thing is when you jump into this, like, I don't care how advanced you are, like, you don't know nearly as much as what you think you know. And I thought I knew a lot more than what I actually did. So surrounding yourself with people that you respect and can mentor you is so huge. And don't be afraid to be the dumbest person in the room because that's how you're going to grow the most. And that'd be my first piece of advice. And I think that was incredibly valuable for me. And then I think from like, if you're talking from like a hitting coach's perspective, like
Yeah.
I think the first thing when you're a young coach, you have to provide value. And a lot of that time, it's not going to be glamorous, right? Like, but kind of what we just talked about with high school guys is like dominating your current role is how you get more responsibility. So you might be the guy who's not necessarily the hitting coach. It's really tough. Like if you go straight from not coaching and you jump into a college program or even a high school program, like if you're the guy running the hitting, that doesn't happen often, right?
Right.
So so one, dominate if there's the hitting coach and whatever he needs. Like if you're coaching bunting, you're coaching base running, you're doing charts, you're feeding the machine, like do that at an incredibly high level. And I think like talking to guys like yourself, like I think you've created such a unique space for yourself when it comes to base running and infield. Like there's not a ton of guys that do it like you do. And I think hitting such a saturated market, right? There's a ton of hitting coaches. There's not many guys that are elite like yourself, like on the infield, outfield, or catching side of things. So if you can dominate that and just immerse yourself, whatever position you feel comfortable coaching, or the base running side of things, like if you can be elite at that, like you're gonna have much more opportunity quicker than if you're coaching in position just because you have to coach a position and you really want to coach hitters. A lot. That's a lot longer of a road, and there's not as many. I mean, there's a ton of talented people out there, but there's not as many guys that are just elite on the defensive side of the ball, on the base running side of things. And like I said, if you can do that at a high level, then you're going to earn more responsibility on the hitting side, or you might just find out, hey, man, I love the infield, the base running, the outfield, whatever the catching, and that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm becoming elite at. But I think in general, just being able to provide some sort of value at the beginning while you're soaking up as much as you can would be my biggest piece of advice. And then I think if you're talking about college coaching specifically, like just understand like you're going to get back pay in this business. That's what Merce always told me is like you're going to have to be okay for when you jump out of college and you're 22, 23, your friends are going to be driving nice cars because they just got a nice salary job straight out of college, and you're going to be pushing around the same car you did in college, and you're going to be eating peanut butter and jelly. And you're going to be doing those things. You're not going to make a ton of money right away, but if you stick in it long enough and you're good at what you do long enough, when you do end up getting a role that you love, like, I mean, dude, it's the best thing in the world. So you have just fight through that initial tough phase. Like you might have to sleep in the locker room a night or two. You might have to look at that bank account and wonder if you have a tank of gas or something like that. But eventually, when you fight through that, it's all going to be worth it because at the end of the day, like um, I only wear dress pants if I'm going to a wedding and I get to be around college guys that keep me young, get to impact lives, get to do what I love, and continue to do that. So it's worth it. But the first few years, you're going to have to fight through it, and I think that's when most coaches' journeys end is the first 2 to 3 years because it is difficult financially. But at the end of the day, you'll be happy you fought through
That's awesome, Jordan, man. Wow. Fire me up, dude. So good.
that.
So good. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. This has been great. Thank you to the Baseball Blue Book Network for partnering with the show. Shout out Valley Sports for being a sponsor for this episode. And Jordan, thank you, man. This is hitting's a space that is always a little controversial depending on where you stand. And I think you said it best, being able to be able to adjust and be that chameleon of what does this player need and what does he need to hear me say to make his best qualities shine, right? So very, very good. And again, thank you so much, man, for being here.
No, I appreciate you, brother, man. Keep doing big things, man. It's always fun to see the content you're putting out, man. I'm excited to see where this game takes you as well.
I appreciate the kind words. Well, listeners, I hope you got something out of that. We will see you next episode.